Around the year 570 AD, in a town somewhere in Arabia, a little boy was born. Later in life, he was visited by the archangel Gabriel to receive revelations from God. This was the God of Adam, Abraham, Moses, and Jesus, and these were the final revelations to humanity, given to the final prophet of God. The prophet's teachings, however, were not well received, and in 622 AD, he and his followers were forced to migrate to a place called Yathrib. This was the beginning of a movement that changed the world forever. That little boy became the Prophet Muhammad. The town he was born in was Mecca, and the revelations would become the foundation of Islam, the submission to God. By 750 AD, the followers of Muhammad's teachings ruled an ever-growing area from the borders of China all the way to the Spanish coast. A quick side note before we begin, this is not a video about the religion of Islam nor the Prophet Muhammad. It's an attempt to explain how the political entities of Islam rose, defeated empires, and spread so far and wide. Hi, my name is Sebastian, and you're watching 7 Facts. Prior to the rise of Islam, the Arabian Peninsula was home to various nations and tribes and poorly organized cities. Throughout the ages, this arid and very rough landscape was inhabited mostly by nomadic tribes like the Bedouins, and sedentary populations that practiced agriculture were small and found around small oases. The few towns and cities of Arabia mostly traded spices and fragrances like incense, and since they were relatively close to the Silk Road, they always managed to sell their goods. These pre-Islamic populations spoke more than one language and had various polytheistic religions, having quite a few gods to worship. The city of Mecca was already a cultural center long before the rise of Islam. When Muhammad received the first revelations, he was a 40-year-old merchant. After he began to preach the word of God, there were some who listened, but as I said, he was mostly received with a lot of hostility and resistance. So Muhammad and his followers had to go into exile to the city of Yathrib, that would later be renamed as Medina, the city of the Prophet. It was here that Muhammad managed to gather a large following, united the local tribes, attacked the caravans, and eventually conquered Mecca itself. By 632 AD, when Muhammad passed away, the whole of the Arabian Peninsula was united under this new religion. Followers of the faith came to be known as Muslims, meaning someone who submits. These Muslims would soon come in contact with not one but 2 ancient and great empires, the Persians and the East Romans, the Byzantines. The successors of Muhammad called themselves caliphs, literally successors. The first caliph was Abu Bakr, father-in-law of Muhammad, followed by 3 other caliphs. They are known as the Rashidun caliphs, and under them the Persian Empire collapsed. Syria of the Byzantines fell into their hands, as did Roman Egypt. Impressively, the new rulers tolerated the faiths of the locals and didn't force them to convert to Islam. These new territories that were still expanding were ruled by governors based in military camps who received orders from the caliph in Medina. So how were the Arabs able to conquer so much so fast? After all, they were up against some of the greatest empires in human history. Well, the answer is complicated. Because of their lifestyle and harsh landscape in Arabia, Arabs were exceptionally mobile. They knew how to organize while on the move and were able warriors. But prior to Muhammad, Arabs lived in divided tribes, so they never posed any real threat to anyone but themselves. Once united though, it was a different story. And it was Islam that united all of these tribes, and one must not underestimate the power of faith. On the other side, the Persians and Byzantines were almost always at each other's throat. For centuries, the Iranians and Romans exhausted each other through big and small wars. And this exhaustion at least partly translated into a general discontent among their populations. All the while, Arab leaders were pretty much brilliant at warfare and civil governance. Of course, these are only the highlights of reasons you can in fact spend your entire academic career learning about the early spread of Islam. But anyway, Despite the outstanding military successes, the Muslims pretty quickly began to divide into factions. Governors of far-off lands tried to gain independence, and everywhere there was a certain tension between quote-unquote true disciples of Muhammad and those who only sought to gain power. These internal struggles erupted in 656 when Uthman ibn Affan, the third caliph, was assassinated. Uthman was followed by Ali ibn Abi Talib, who faced a full-blown civil war. Ali was the last of the four rightly guided caliphs. His supporters believed that someone from Muhammad's family, namely his cousin and son-in-law Ali, should have succeeded him right from the start. Eventually, Ali too was assassinated in 661 AD. Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan, a relative of the previous caliph, took power, and he became the first caliph of the Umayyad caliphate. In this bloody and confusing era, there were lots of conflicts, internal and external. But at the same time, these were the years when the Quran, the recitation, was standardized and became the holy scripture of Muslims. This was also the period when a new calendar was introduced, the Hijri, a lunar calendar that starts from the moment Muhammad and his followers fled from Mecca to Medina. So in those first decades, a new world order coagulated through conquests, bloodshed, but also faith. And the Umayyad Caliphate was now in charge of continuing this change. The Umayyads, by the way, took their name from the clan from which Caliph Muawiyah came from. Under the Umayyads, the position of the caliph became hereditary, unlike the Rashidun caliphs who were elected. To better govern their domain, the caliphs moved their capital to Damascus. Previously, the caliphate was run from Medina and Kufa. While in Damascus, the Islamic State borrowed some ideas from their enemies. Several institutions of the Byzantines and Persians were basically copied into the caliphate, in some cases literally. Texts were simply translated into Arabic and applied as such. And in the meantime, the Umayyad continued to expand. They consolidated their power in Persia and expanded into North Africa. They built sanctuaries and monumental houses of worship to showcase the power of the faith. Among them was the Dome of the Rock, a mosque built on Temple Mount in Jerusalem, on the site of the second Jewish temple, where it's believed that Muhammad rose to heaven. This, by the way, is the world's oldest surviving work of Islamic architecture. Other grand mosques were of course built in Damascus, Aleppo, or Medina. At this time, conversion to Islam was still optional, but non-Muslims had to pay extra taxes and high positions were reserved only for Muslims. Slowly but surely, these incentives encouraged the locals to willingly convert to Islam and to adopt Arabic customs and traditions, especially in the East, modern-day Iran and Iraq. Nevertheless, non-Arabs were regarded as second-class citizens regardless of their religion, and that sowed the seeds for the next chapter. The internal struggles that plagued the Rashidun Caliphate followed the Umayyads too. Remember I told you about Ali and how his followers believed he was the rightful successor to Muhammad? Well, those followers were still around and they still believed that Ali's descendants should be in charge. So, when one of Ali's sons was murdered, he was declared a martyr and provoked a major dispute. A dispute that eventually led to a full-blown schism within Islam. This group became known as the followers of Ali, in Arabic the Shi'at Ali or simply Shia. Sunnis, who got their name from al-Sunnah, people of the tradition, among other things, don't regard Ali as the rightful successor to Muhammad. Anyway, this religious divide was only part of what was happening. By the year 750, multiple anti-Umayyad factions united to overthrow the dynasty. These factions were led by the Abbasid family, whose members claimed to have descended from Al-Abbas, an uncle of Muhammad. Discontent cutting across faiths and ethnicities, combined with what was one of the most well-organized revolutions of the time, ultimately destroyed the Umayyads. It was barely 100 and some years after Muhammad's death, and a new third state was born, the Abbasid Caliphate. The Abbasid family based themselves in the former Persian Empire, choosing Baghdad as their capital more than once. The new rulers mercilessly eliminated anyone who stood in their way or didn't submit to their will and replaced all of the Umayyad public servants. They even established a secret service of sort that spied on governors from faraway places to make sure they didn't step out of line and remain loyal. The Abbasids used the Quran and Islamic law to prove and consolidate their right to power. They also introduced a more rigorous taxation policy to better fund the army and administration. Now, this all might sound like this dynasty was tyrannical, and in some way it was, but the Abbasid era is generally considered to be a golden age of Islamic art, science, and architecture. In this era, the Arabic language became prominent both in religion and in politics. Large encyclopedias were created and the gathering of knowledge, folklore, poetry and literature was joined by translations of Persian, Greek and Roman treatises of science and philosophy. Some of those ancient texts were kept and translated in Europe too, but the majority of them would have been lost forever without these Arabic translations. Furthermore, the scientific revolution of the 16th and 17th centuries would have come at a much later date without these texts that were saved under the Abbasids. Despite these major successes, the Abbasids were no more undefeatable than their predecessors. In the mid-10th century, the Umayyads and Seljuk Turks, professional warriors paid by the Abbasids, took power away from the dynasty and transformed them into a ceremonial family. The Abbasids ruled only in name and had very little power left, but their caliphate survived until the arrival of the Mongols in the 13th century. Although the Islamic world was united by faith, they didn't always have a single ruler. While the Abbasids concentrated their power in the east, the furthest regions of the caliphate began to slip away. The first to break away was Spain. In 756 AD, Spain became an emirate, a sort of independent principality, ruled by a branch of the exiled Umayyad family. Shortly after, the governors of Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia and Egypt also broke away. By the 10th century, Islam was divided into 3 caliphates. By now, the term caliph referred to any self-proclaimed ruler of a large enough Islamic community. The Abbasids of Baghdad were joined by the Umayyads in Spain and the Fatimids of Egypt. The Fatimids were a dynasty of Ismaili Shia Muslims, yet another branch of Islam. This sect began in secret somewhere in Iraq but gradually spread to all corners of the Islamic world. In 910 AD, Ubaydallah reached Tunisia, conquered North Africa and called himself a caliph. His family claimed to have descended from Fatima, the daughter of Prophet Muhammad, hence the dynastic name Fatimid. By 969 AD, the Fatimids conquered Egypt and founded Al-Qahira, the Conqueror, a city known today as Cairo. From there, they continued their conquest and reached Syria and Palestine, Aleppo and Damascus. Then, the Fatimid Caliph ordered the destruction of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the site where Jesus was crucified and buried. This was met with shock by Christian Europe and served as an impetus to later crusades. Meanwhile, Cairo became a crucial center of trade between the Mediterranean, the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean. Porcelain from China and spices from India and Southeast Asia were brought to Egyptian ports in the Red Sea. Gold and slaves traveled on the Nile from Sudan and Ethiopia. And from Cairo, all were sold to the rest of the world, including to Europe through Genovese and Venetian merchants. Cairo also became a center of religious learning. The Al-Azhar University is not just one of the oldest universities in the world, but also, ever since its founding in 972 AD, it's considered as the most prestigious university for Islamic learning. The Fatimids continued to rule over their domains until 1171. That was when a Kurdish warrior, Yusuf ibn Ayyub ibn Shadi, better known as Saladin, conquered the Fatimids. He used Egypt as a base to retake the Holy Land from the Crusaders, but his dynasty would only last for 1 century. The Mamluks, freed soldiers and former slaves, overthrew the Ayyubids, and now they ruled Egypt. Meanwhile, the Umayyads of Spain ruled the Emirate of Cordoba. In 929 AD, their ruler adopted the title Caliph in response to the rise of the Fatimids. Here in Spain, something unique was happening. There was a mixture of Islamic ideas with Christian and Spanish influences, and it created a one-of-a-kind culture in the Islamic world. An example of this fusion is the Alhambra, a fortress in Granada that mixed together the best of Islamic and Spanish Renaissance architectures. Spain was the source from which Islamic and pre-Islamic knowledge entered medieval Europe. Moorish Spain, as it was often called, was in fact a very developed and civilized land compared to the rest of Europe, and in fact it had a great influence on neighboring Christian kingdoms. Here, both Muslim and Christian scholars coexisted, both were able to speak Arabic, so some cities like Toledo became centers where ancient texts were translated from Arabic to Latin. The Reconquista, the gradual retake of Iberia by Christian states, ended in 1492 when Emir Muhammad XII surrendered the Emirate of Granada to Queen Isabella I of Castile. In the rest of the world, the caliphates of Arabia didn't extend their power, but thanks to the many trade routes that existed at the time, merchants traveled all over the old world. So they spread not just their merchandise, but also their religion. And so, Islam reached India in the 13th century with the establishment of the Delhi Sultanate. From here, Muhammad's teachings spread to Southeast Asia and Indonesia. Merchants and missionaries also reached East and West Africa, and places like Ghana, Senegal, and Sudan came in contact with Islam. If all of this sounds confusing, don't worry, you're not alone. Oftentimes, we are presented with a much too simplified version of history. The early spread of Islam may seem to have been a swift and successful endeavor, but in reality it was anything but. Yes, the religion was spread to large populations, but the political struggles of this endeavor were just as ugly and bloody as any other event in history. I hope this video was interesting enough to have inspired you to look into it further on your own. If you liked it, leave a like and subscribe. You can leave your comments downstairs, and you can also check out my Patreon page if you want to support me. I do hope to see you next time. Bye.